After 15 years as CFO, the new CEO called me old school and unable to innovate. He brought in a young hotshot to replace me. At my final board meeting, they barely acknowledged my departure. I left quietly, taking nothing but my integrity. 6 weeks later, "You're just a little too old school for where we're headed. We need someone who can innovate." My name is James Harper. I'm 62 years old. And until this morning, I was the chief financial officer at Horizon Industries. For 15 years, I joined when we were a struggling family business with 3 small factories in Cleveland. Now we're a publicly traded company with 18 plants across the Midwest. I helped to navigate us through 2 recessions, an acquisition crisis, and more boardroom politics than I care to remember. I'm not flashy. I don't schmooze investors at cocktail parties, but the numbers were always right. The books were always clean, and we never missed a filing deadline on my watch. Then Ethan Caldwell arrived, 36 years old, with his designer blazers and expensive sneakers. The board brought him in as CEO 3 months ago, and he swept through our offices like a tornado, talking about synergy and disruption and realigning vision. I knew what was coming the moment he scheduled our first one-on-one meeting. "The market's changing, James," he said today, leaning back in my chair with his feet propped on my desk. "We need someone who speaks the language of modern finance." I said nothing, just nodded once, and offered a tight-lipped handshake. "We're bringing in Nathan Brooks, 29. Brilliant mind, just did a TEDx talk on financial innovation that's getting real traction online." "I see," I said, my voice steady. "When's the transition?" Ethan smiled, surprised by my calm. 2 weeks. We'll announce it at the next board meeting." I packed my personal items that afternoon, while everyone was in an all-hands meeting about our exciting new direction. 15 years in this office, and everything fit in a single cardboard box: family photos, a commemorative coin from our IPO, the leather portfolio my wife Margaret gave me before she passed. On my way out, I noticed Sarah from accounts holding back tears by the elevator. She'd been with me since day one. "Don't worry," I told her. "It's all part of the cycle." What I didn't tell her was that I'd spent the last 6 months quietly documenting a series of questionable transactions that started appearing in our books shortly after Ethan arrived and grew more frequent after he mentioned bringing in his finance guru, Nathan. I wasn't planning revenge. I was just doing my job, keeping the books clean. Even on my way out, I grew up working in my father's hardware store in Canton, Ohio, just across the river from Cleveland. He taught me that numbers don't lie, even when people do. I put myself through college stocking shelves and balancing his books at night. When I graduated, I turned down bigger offers to stay local, working my way up through regional companies until Horizon's founder, Edward Marshall, called me personally in 2008. "I need someone who can keep us afloat through this recession," he said. "Someone who sleeps better when the books balance." For 10 years, Edward and I built Horizon into something solid. When he retired, the transition was smooth. The new CEO, Catherine Evans, respected the systems we'd created. We disagreed sometimes, but she listened. We grew steadily, no flashy moves, just solid business practices and clean accounting. Then, Catherine retired, and the board wanted fresh energy. Enter Ethan Caldwell with his Harvard MBA and stint at a Silicon Valley startup that had more buzz than profit. The first red flag appeared during his second week. He bypassed our procurement protocols to hire a marketing consultant, his former classmate at 4 times our standard rate. When I questioned it, he smiled. "We're thinking bigger now, James. The old constraints don't apply." The second flag came when he restructured our reporting lines so finance went through his new chief innovation officer before reaching him. The third was overhearing him tell someone on the phone that our books had a lot of outdated methodology that needed creative solutions. I started watching more closely. Small irregularities appeared, vendor contracts with companies I couldn't properly vet, consultancy fees without deliverables, budget reallocations without department head signatures. My team noticed too. Mark from internal audit stopped by one evening as I was reviewing the quarterly statements. "Something's off with a new tech investment tracking," he said quietly. "Numbers don't match from entry to report. Document everything," I told him. "Just keep it factual." Margaret would have told me to make waves, stand up in a board meeting, go out with a bang. But cancer took her 3 years ago, and without her fire, I'd grown more methodical, more patient. So instead of confrontation, I kept detailed records, downloaded suspicious transactions, cross-referenced irregularities, all while maintaining the same calm demeanor in meetings. Even as Ethan brought in more of his people and pushed out mine, I wasn't being paranoid. The patterns were too consistent. Something bigger was happening, and it centered around this new finance wonderkid, Nathan Brooks. My final board meeting lasted exactly 22 minutes. There was no mention of my 15 years of service. No thank you speech, no plaque or watch, just a line on the agenda that read CFO, transition update. Ethan spoke about exciting new fiscal directions while I sat silently at the far end of the table. The chairman, Charles Bennett, couldn't quite meet my eyes. He'd been on the board when Edward hired me. Now he simply nodded along with Ethan's presentation about how Nathan Brooks would revolutionize our approach to capital allocation. I'd hoped for at least some acknowledgement from Charles, some recognition of what we'd built together. Instead, the meeting moved briskly to the next agenda item, the new headquarters Ethan wanted to build downtown. As everyone filed out, Charles paused briefly by my chair. "You've been an asset, James," he said awkwardly, patting my shoulder. "Best of luck." An asset, like a piece of equipment that had depreciated. I walked back to my office, Nathan's office now, to collect my box. Through the glass wall, I could see Ethan showing him around, pointing at the graphs on my walls like they were ancient cave paintings. Sarah was waiting by my door, holding an envelope. The accounting department took up a collection, she said, for a proper send-off dinner. I thanked her, knowing I wouldn't use it. As she turned to leave, I asked, "Sarah, when did those invoices from Apex Consulting start coming in?" She thought for a moment. "February, I think. Right after Mr. Caldwell announced the Digital Transformation Initiative. February, 2 weeks before Ethan first mentioned bringing in Nathan. That night at home, I spread all my documentation across my dining room table, 6 months of suspicious transactions. Invoices for services never rendered, foreign consulting fees without tax documentation, and, most telling, shell vendors that all traced back to a holding company called Summit Ventures, which had been registered just 3 days before Ethan was announced as CEO. The pattern was clear now. Ethan hadn't brought in Nathan because I was old school. He'd brought him in because they had a system siphoning company funds through fake vendors and consultants, hiding it in complex digital transformation costs that were hard to question in today's business environment. They needed me gone because I asked too many questions, kept too close an eye on the details. I sat back in my chair, looking at the evidence laid out before me. For the first time since Margaret died, I felt something beyond the numb routine of daily existence, not anger. Exactly. Something colder, more focused. I opened my laptop and began organizing everything methodically. Cross-references, timelines, account trails. I wasn't going to confront Ethan. I wasn't going to call an emergency board meeting or go to the press. That wasn't my style. No. I would do what I'd always done, let the numbers tell the story. But this time, I'd make sure the right people were listening when they spoke. A week after my departure, I decided to reach out to Charles Bennett directly. Despite his lukewarm goodbye, he'd always been fair. He deserved a chance to address this before it got worse. I called his office and left a message with his assistant. Just wanted to discuss some financial concerns from my final weeks. Nothing urgent but worth reviewing. He called back the next day, his voice guarded. "James, good to hear from you. Ethan mentioned you might reach out." My stomach tightened. "Did he?" "Yes. He said you were having trouble transitioning. Said you had some concerns about our new systems that Nathan already addressed." "Charles, there are irregularities that predate Nathan's arrival. Significant ones." Silence on the line. Then, "Look, James, the first understand this is difficult. 15 years is a long time, but the board has full confidence in Ethan's vision. And Nathan has already streamlined several processes you flagged as problematic. That's not. I'm afraid I have another call. Perhaps we can catch up at the holiday party. I hear you're still on the invite list." Very generous of Ethan, considering. Considering what? I wanted to ask, but Charles had already hung up. The next morning, I received an email from Horizon's legal department. The language was carefully neutral, but the message was clear. Any accusations of financial impropriety without substantial evidence could be considered defamatory. They kindly reminded me of my confidentiality agreement. They were closing ranks. Someone, Ethan, obviously had anticipated I might notice the discrepancies and had already poisoned the well. I decided to try another approach. Mark from internal audit had been on my team for 8 years. If anyone else had noticed problems, it would be him. We met at a diner far from the office. Mark looked nervous, constantly checking over his shoulder. "They promoted me," he said before I could even ask about the accounts. "New title, big raise. I'm now reporting directly to Nathan." "Congratulations," I said, keeping my tone even. "How's that working out?" Mark stared at his coffee. "They've changed all the internal reporting systems. New software, new protocols. Nathan says it's more efficient." "And is it?" He looked up, his expression strained. "James, I can't. They had me sign additional NDAs. They're watching everyone who worked closely with you." "I see. They're saying things." "James, about why you left." "What things?" Mark lowered his voice. "That you were resistant to necessary changes. That you made mistakes in the last quarter's reporting that Nathan caught. Some people are even saying there were ethical concerns." My hands gripped my coffee mug so hard, I thought it might break. They weren't just pushing me out. They were destroying my reputation to cover their tracks. "I should go," Mark said, throwing cash on the table. "I've got a mortgage and twins starting college next year. I can't. It's all right," I said, forcing a smile. "Take care of your family." Mark, as he hurried out, I sat alone, processing what I'd learned. My options were dwindling. The board wouldn't listen. My former team was either bought off or scared silent. And now they were attacking my reputation, making it nearly impossible for me to raise concerns without looking like a disgruntled ex-employee. They thought they had me cornered, but they'd overlooked something important. I still had access to the audit server. During my final days, while everyone thought I was quietly cleaning out my office, I'd set up an emergency admin account, a standard practice for system transitions that no one had bothered to check. It wouldn't last forever, but it might be enough. That night, I used my emergency credentials to access Horizon's audit server. I suspected they'd eventually discover and remove the account, so I worked efficiently, following the money trails I'd already identified. What I found made my earlier suspicions seem quaint by comparison. Summit Ventures wasn't just one holding company. It was a hub in a network of shell entities, all interconnected through a maze of transactions designed to hide their relationship. Some dated back to before Ethan even joined Horizon, suggesting this wasn't an opportunistic theft, it was a planned infiltration. The more I dug, the clearer the picture became. Ethan hadn't been hired despite his mediocre track record. He'd been installed. His previous company, the Silicon Valley startup with more buzz than profit, had been bankrolled by the same investment group that had recently gained 3 seats on Horizon's board, including the seat held by Charles Bennett's nephew, Thomas, who joined 6 months ago. This wasn't just an executive skimming from the company. This was a coordinated attack on Horizon itself, a slow-motion asset strip disguised as modernization. I downloaded everything I could find, organizing it meticulously. By dawn, I had traced over $12 million that had been siphoned from various departments through falsified vendor contracts, inflated service agreements, and phantom consultancy fees. Exhausted, I made coffee and sat on my back porch, watching the sun rise over the Ohio River. Margaret and I had bought this house for the view. "Water calms your overthinking brain," she'd said. Now, I let the river's steady flow organize my thoughts. My initial instinct to quietly alert the board had been naive. This went deeper than Ethan and Nathan. Some board members were likely complicit, which explained why they'd been so eager to replace Catherine with an outsider when she retired. I needed to be smarter about this, more strategic. I spent the morning mapping connections between board members, Ethan's previous associates, and the shell companies. By afternoon, I'd identified 3 board members who were likely unaware of the scheme. Laura Thompson, a former manufacturing executive who joined the board after retiring from a competitor, Michael Chen, who represented our workers' pension fund, and George Ramsey, our oldest board member, who rarely spoke but never missed a vote. I also discovered something I'd overlooked. Nathan Brooks had worked at Apex Consulting, one of the shell vendors, 3 years ago. His name was buried in their incorporation documents as a founding partner, though he'd been removed from public-facing materials before being hired at Horizon. As I compiled this information, my phone rang. The number was blocked, but I answered anyway. "Is this James Harper?" a woman's voice asked. "Speaking. My name is Emily Carter. I'm with the Securities and Exchange Commission's Enforcement Division." My heart stopped momentarily. "We've received an anonymous tip about potential financial improprieties at Horizon Industries involving its new leadership team. The information provided suggested you might have relevant knowledge." I chose my words carefully. "I recently left my position as CFO after 15 years. Yes, we're aware. Would you be willing to meet informally to discuss certain transactions that occurred over the past 6 months? Who else knows you're calling me? No one outside my immediate team. This is preliminary fact-finding, not a formal investigation yet. I considered my options. Going to the SEC directly would make this very public, very quickly. Horizon's stock would plummet. Thousands of employees, people like Sarah and Mark, could be affected if the company collapsed under a scandal. But someone had already tipped off the SEC. The clock was ticking. "I'll need some time," I said finally. "Time for what, Mr. Harper? To make sure I get this right?" I gave myself 3 days to execute my plan. First, I needed to ensure the evidence couldn't be erased. I copied all my documentation to multiple secure locations and set up dead man switches. If I didn't enter a code every 48 hours, the full package would automatically send to the SEC, the Department of Justice, and 3 financial journalists I respected. Next, I carefully drafted emails to the 3 board members I believed were uninvolved: Laura, Michael, and George. I didn't accuse anyone directly. Instead, I framed it as concerning patterns I noticed before my departure and included just enough evidence to raise serious questions without overwhelming them with details. I scheduled these to send automatically in 2 days. The most delicate part came next. I contacted Sarah, asking if she could meet me for coffee. She agreed immediately. "They're gutting your whole department," she told me when we met, her voice barely above a whisper. "Nathan says we're consolidating financial operations, but half the team has gotten reassignment notices, and the other half is being reviewed, including you." She nodded, blinking back tears. 2 years at Horizon, and suddenly I'm told my position is redundant. I've got 6 weeks to find another role internally, or... I waited while she composed herself. "Sarah, do you remember that audit protocol we established after the Jackson acquisition? The one with the separate verification pathway?" She frowned. Then understanding dawned. "The parallel audit trail, the one that automatically duplicates all transactions over $50.0 to the secure server. Is it still running?" "As far as I know, it's hard-coded into the system. Nathan's team would have to specifically know about it to disable it." I nodded, relief washing over me. "And who has access to those records now?" "Just the senior auditing team. And I guess Nathan, since he's CFO. What about the backup archiving? Is that still sent to Secure Vault on the 1st of each month?" She thought for a moment. "Yes, that's automated too. The October backup would have gone out last week." "Perfect. Even if Ethan and Nathan discovered what I was doing and tried to alter the records, the originals would already be safely preserved off-site." "Sarah, I'm going to ask you something important, and you can absolutely say no." I slid a sealed envelope across the table. Inside is a formal letter detailing specific financial concerns that, as a senior accounting manager, you're obligated to report to internal audit. It references only information you would have legitimate access to in your role. If you submit this, they legally cannot retaliate against you without triggering whistleblower protections. Her hand trembled as she took the envelope. "Is this why they're really pushing me out? Because I might notice these things?" "Probably. And if you submit this, it creates an official internal record that can't be ignored. It forces internal audit to investigate specific transactions, the same ones I've documented elsewhere." Sarah squared her shoulders. "When? Tomorrow morning would be ideal. On my way home, I made 2 more stops, first to a notary public, where I signed and authenticated a detailed affidavit about everything I'd discovered, then to my lawyer's office. where I left sealed instructions to be opened if anything happened to me. That evening, I received a text message from Mark Z asking lots of questions about old audit protocols. Seems nervous. Watch yourself. They were starting to realize their mistake. They'd been so focused on pushing me out that they'd overlooked what I might have already documented. The pieces were in place. Now, I just had to wait. 6 weeks after my departure, everything detonated simultaneously. The internal audit, triggered by Sarah's formal complaint, reached Nathan's desk the same morning that my detailed emails reached the 3 uninvolved board members. By noon, Laura Thompson had called an emergency board meeting, using her authority as audit committee chair. I wasn't there, but Sarah texted me updates throughout the day. Board meeting started at 2, Ethan looking pale, and just got escorted to a conference room with legal. Outside auditors arrived, taking over main conference room. By evening, the news had broken internally. Horizon was under investigation for financial irregularities. All executives who had joined under Ethan's tenure were placed on administrative leave pending a full forensic audit. I turned off my phone and took a long walk along the river, watching the Cleveland skyline light up as darkness fell. For the first time in months, I felt my shoulders relax. The next morning, I received 3 missed calls from Charles Bennett, from Ethan, and from Thomas Bennett. I ignored them all. Instead, I answered a call from George Ramsey, our oldest board member. 15 years of clean books, he said, his voice gravelly with age. No scandals, no restatements, no missed filings. I should have spoken up when they pushed you out. You're speaking up now. George, that's what matters. The board has appointed me acting chairman while we sort through this mess. Charles and Thomas have resigned, along with 2 others. We've terminated Ethan and Nathan for cause. I said nothing. We'd like you to come back, James, just temporarily, to help the forensic team and stabilize things. I watched a barge slowly making its way down the Ohio, steady and purposeful. I'll help with the investigation, I said finally, but I won't be coming back permanently. May I ask why? Because Horizon needs someone who can innovate, I said, allowing myself a small smile. I'm just a little too old school. 3 months later, I sat on my new deck in Asheville, North Carolina, watching the sunset behind the Blue Ridge Mountains. My cabin wasn't large, just 2 bedrooms and an office, but the view made up for it. The investigation at Horizon had uncovered exactly what I'd suspected, a coordinated scheme to extract value through fraudulent contracts and artificial costs. Ethan, Nathan, and several board members now faced federal charges for securities, fraud, and embezzlement. I'd spent 6 weeks helping the forensic accountants unravel everything, then packed up my Cleveland house and headed for the mountains. Margaret and I had always talked about retiring here. The settlement Horizon offered for my consulting services during the investigation was generous enough to buy this cabin outright and still have plenty left over. I'd been clear. With them, no public statements, no press conferences, no dramatic returns. That wasn't my style. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Got the promotion to director of accounting. The new CEO wants to rebuild the department properly. I smiled and typed back, well deserved. Always keep a parallel audit trail. My lawyer had called yesterday with news that the SEC was closing its case against Horizon after the company agreed to governance reforms and financial penalties that pointedly excluded punishment for shareholders and regular employees. The right outcome. As darkness settled over the mountains, I opened the leather portfolio Margaret had given me years ago. Inside was the last photo we'd taken together at the lake house, the summer before her diagnosis. You were right, I said to her smiling face. I should have made more time for views like this. Tomorrow, I'd drive into town and meet with the director of a local nonprofit who needed help organizing their finances. Nothing flashy, just good, clean accounting for people doing important work. Some might call that old school. I just called it integrity.